Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee with Craig, where we talk about all things firearms, Second Amendment advocacy, policy, culture, movies, you name it. We're talking about it right here on Coffee with Craig. So please take a moment to like and share this video program, whether you watch us on Facebook or on YouTube, or you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. Make sure to let your friends know about Coffee with Craig. Also, please take a moment, visit fpcgear.com. It's fpcgear.com. We always have new designs, new ideas for Christmas gifts. That's right, Christmas gifts. I know that you have some friends out there who support the Second Amendment. Help them by buying this, because then they'll also know that their gift not just makes them look good, but they'll also know that the money that you spent went right back into the fight to keep and bear arms. So you can support the Second Amendment, and your friends can look good doing it. That's fpcgear.com. All right, now that we've paid the bills, let's get on to today's topic. This is a tough topic. It is a tough one because I know that so many folks out there have been following this issue, have been paying attention to what's been going on. And it's really a topic that's hard to have an open and honest discussion about, because in this discussion, all of us, when I say all, I mean all, have a kind of a responsibility to speak truth to power, but also be honest with ourselves, to be able to say what we need to say to folks in other demographics. And you'll know what I'm talking about as we get into the conversation, but also being willing to look at ourselves and make sure we are part of the solution and not part of the problem. I'm sure you guys have seen this face plastered all over the news. This gentleman, he was discharged from the military. He was a concealed carry permit holder who was in a mall. And unfortunately, there was a shooting that took place, and Mr. E.J. Fitzgerald Bradford Jr., he was there. Luckily, he was there helping individuals, assisting them, encouraging them to go away from the shooting. He had drawn his firearm. Well, when law enforcement showed up, they thought he was the shooter, and they shot and killed him. Now, witnesses say, well, I don't even want to get into what witnesses say happened. You guys, I'm sure you guys have all read the story, or at least seen the story. But suffice it to say, initially they said they thought that they'd killed the gunman. They put out a press release, yada, 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 heroic. But then eventually when they realized that he was a good guy with a gun, that he actually had a concealed carry permit, needless to say, it was another tragic story of an individual, of a black man with a gun being gunned down by police. And that's how many on the left are using it. Here's a law-abiding black man shot to death by police, which then raises the question in many people's mind, can an armed black man, legally or not, ever be considered a good guy with a gun? Now, this probably wouldn't be much of an issue if this story had in fact occurred, all by itself. But it didn't occur in absentia. There was also another incident. You guys probably also remember this face. This young man was an armed security guard. His name was Jamel Robinson. He's in the Chicago area. He was working at a nightclub. He was breaking up a fight. And as he was breaking up a fight, he subdued an individual and was restraining them until law enforcement arrived. And then when law enforcement did arrive, they thought he was the suspect and they shot him. Once again, this is an armed security guard who was legally carrying. But once again, all they saw, armed man, and they shot him. He happened to be black. And now there once again raises the question, can an armed black man be considered a good guy with a gun? And once again, this is not the only case. There's one more. You guys remember this guy, Mr. Jason Washington. He was a concealed carry permit holder in the state of Washington. In Oregon. He was out at a sports bar. Was watching sports. He had just been interviewed by local television because he was out watching sports, and a fight breaks out, and he goes to break up the fight. In the midst of that, his firearm falls out of its holster. Law enforcement is there. He goes to reach to pick it up, and law enforcement shot him. Once again, man of color with a gun. can he be a good guy with a gun? And it raised the question, is there an epidemic of law enforcement shooting or taking the life of unarmed men of color? I say that there is an epidemic of law enforcement shooting people who are armed. That's right, people, not just black men, but men, period. Now, you guys may not have heard of this individual. It might help if I clicked on it. There we go. You might not have heard of this individual. Oh, I'm sorry. I totally forgot about Philando Castile. You guys know about Philando. He was a concealed carry permit holder in the state of in Minnesota, was pulled over. The guy thought he fit the description and wound up basically taking his life. Wound up taking his life. Once again, another concern. And all of these, the first three that I talked about, all of those have occurred within literally the last 6 months, right? This one was a little while ago, but this was kind of one of the first ones that kind of kicked off this whole discussion about whether or not you could be a armed black man and still be considered a good guy with a gun. But I tell you once again, it is not something that is just unique to men of color. You guys probably haven't heard of this individual. And I'm sure you can imagine why you have not heard of this individual. His name is Mr. Andrew Scott. Now, Mr. Andrew Scott was in Florida. Late in the middle of the night, I think it was about 2 or 3 in the morning, law enforcement was knocking on doors because there apparently had been an armed robbery somewhere nearby. And they were knocking on doors at, once again, 2, 3 in the morning. They knocked on his door. He was up playing video games, and he's wondering who's knocking on his door at 2, 3 in the morning. So he grabs his firearm to go to answer the door. He opens the door. He sees an armed man standing outside of his door. So he goes to shut the door. The individual on the other side of the door shoots at him and kills him. The guy on the outside of the door was a law enforcement officer who shot a man inside of his own home with a gun. And all he did was answer his door and exercise his right to keep and bear arms. That's pretty much about all he did. Here's another incident that another individual you guys may not have heard of. This gentleman, his name is Mr. Gary Black. Mr. Gary Black is an individual who called police. There was an intruder in his home. He basically shot the intruder. He wound up shooting the intruder. This is an individual who someone broke into his home, and he wound up. Law enforcement arrived on the scene. He had let them know that he shot the individual. Showed up on the scene. They go into the house. They see the guy with the gun, and then they shot him. Once again, law-abiding citizen with a gun in his own home. In his own home. Was shot dead. Another good guy with a gun who happened to not be black. Now, for those of you who think, well, you know what? These are clearly people who, maybe they just didn't know what they were doing. And maybe that's evidence that maybe the average person shouldn't have a firearm because you never know how law enforcement is going to react. I mean, they're the ones that are trained. They're the ones that know how to deal with and how to interact with law enforcement. They kind of know what to expect in situations like this. Well, for those folks who offer that, I offer this individual to you. Now, this is also another gentleman that you may not recognize. His name is Mr. Jeffrey Breitkoff. Mr. Breitkoff was actually a Nassau County police officer. He showed up on the scene of a crime. He got reports of a crime in progress. He was in plain clothes. Showed up on the scene. And unfortunately, while he was there, he would wind up getting shot by law enforcement because they thought, once again, he was a suspect. Now, I know you're wondering, you're saying, Craig, why are you telling us all this? Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. Number one, studies that have been put out, at least the studies that I've seen so far, all point to the fact that police are no more likely to shoot an armed black man than they are to shoot an armed white man. You guys need to know that, or an unarmed white man. In either case, they are no more likely to shoot a black man over a white man. And once again, the statistics and the studies bear that out. Now, there are studies that do show that being a person of color, in particular a black man, you are probably more likely to have to deal with the issue of use of force. You are more likely to have force used against you. But whether or not that force rises to the level of a firearm or getting shot or shot at is a whole different story. But I think one of the things that we are seeing is we are seeing more and more individuals, as more and more individuals are owning firearms, as more and more individuals are carrying firearms, we have to do something to help both those who have firearms and those and law enforcement. There needs to be something that we do in order to whether it's de-escalate or be able to identify or find a way through some sort of training in order to, one, help law enforcement be able to either identify or to be able to recognize I don't know what it is, to be able to basically not shoot good guys with guns, whether it's in their own home or whether it's in public. Because as we know, more and more people are carrying. Whether it's open carry, whether it's constitutional carry, or whether it's permitted carry. More and more people are doing that. So we need to make sure and find a way that law enforcement find a technique. And I don't know what that is. I'm not a cop. I'm not a law enforcement officer, so I don't have the expertise. And by the way, this is not me blaming officers, right? Officers do what is policy and what is law and how they're trained. And that's what they've got to go on. And if we're recognizing that there's an area where there could be additional training, like I don't know what sort of training the average police officer goes through when it comes to use of force scenarios or active shooter scenarios. If you guys know, put a link or something to it in the comments, because I'd love to know what different departments are doing when it comes to active shooter training for their law enforcement. And by the way, if you are an LEO, does that include how to interact or how to recognize legally armed citizens in those situations? That would be good to know, because if it doesn't exist, or if it does exist and not everybody is using it, or most law enforcement agencies aren't using it, well, then maybe it's something we ought to consider including in the training, right? But along with that, we need to make sure that, I'm not one who believes in quote unquote mandating training, but I also believe that because first of all, I believe that when you mandate training, I believe that people will get as little out of it as they possibly can and try and just get out of it the fastest and cheapest way they can. But I believe that when you accept the responsibility, when you exercise the right to own a firearm, you also have a responsibility to make sure that you are trained, not just trained on how to effectively use that firearm, but to understand everything that goes with that, understanding that if you are carrying and you are in a situation and you're in public, how do you then interact? When do you draw your firearm? And I know a lot of concealed carry courses do that. But also when do you not draw it? When do you holster it? When do you put it down? What are the things that you can do to help protect yourself and others? In this case, now we're also talking about interacting with law enforcement. That's something that needs to be a part of concealed carry training. Once again, so if you're a trainer out there, if you already do that, bravo. If you don't do that, maybe that's something that we need to start considering as a part of your training. And if you are a gun owner, let me be honest. If you are a gun owner, I know that if you're concealed carrying, chances are concealed carry, the only class you probably take is your concealed carry class. You need to do more. You need to learn more. You need to get used to more. You need to train, because that in the end is what is going to make a difference. I'm not just talking about taking classes, but I'm also talking about training and getting professional training. So that is the taking classes. Because once again, you have not just a right, but you have a responsibility to make sure that the idea is to make yourself and make your family, make your community safer. Wherever you are, wherever you have that firearm, you want to make that area safer. So I want to encourage you guys, if you don't do that, you need to do that, right? But also, once again, law enforcement training. I believe that we can solve a lot of these problems between the two, between the training of law enforcement and the training of armed civilians. I believe that training can be a major solution to deal with some of these problems. That's not to say that it's not going to happen, because people make mistakes. But when I look at these scenarios, the first thing that I look at is, was it a good shoot? In other words, did they follow the law? Then the next thing I look at is, okay, well, if they followed the law, then did the individual follow the sort of the basic understanding or the training that one would get in terms of concealed carrying or having a firearm in your home? Did they do something did something that they do, some part of their action other than just possessing the firearm, lead in part or in whole to what happened? I also look at the law enforcement. Did they follow department policy and training? If they follow department policy and training and the individual did nothing wrong, well, then there's something wrong. Then we have to figure out, how do we then address that situation through training? Are there things that we can do in training or changing in policy that can help fix the situation or can help make sure that situation doesn't happen again? Folks, once again, as more and more people are exercising their right to keep and bear arms, we're going to see more and more incidents like this. And what I would like to see is, I'd like to see those number of incidents reduced. I'd like to be able to look at a situation and say, you know what? That's a good policy. They got good training and they followed it. And unfortunately, stuff happens. Worst case scenario, I'd like to be able to say nothing happened at all. I'd like to be able to say that situations didn't happen. And unfortunately, you don't ever hear about situations that didn't happen because people actually got good training and did what they're supposed to do. Because the media doesn't report on good things happening. They don't report on good guy with a gun scenarios where individuals who are armed citizens actually defend themselves. Well, at least the major mainstream media doesn't. Local news does, but. Anyway, that's just kind of what I wanted to share with you guys today. And I know some folks are going to be pissed because they're going to be like, "Oh, well, you're down on law enforcement." No, I'm not down on law enforcement. Like I told you in the very beginning, I am someone who believes that all of us bear some responsibility in trying to fix the problem. Law enforcement, as well as us individuals who carry, and policymakers. All of us have to take a look at ourselves, not so much look at other people, but take a look at ourselves and figure out, how can we be a part of the solution? How can I protect myself, my family, my community? First and foremost, by making sure that I am exercising my right and my responsibility to keep and bear arms. Secondly, that I make sure that I'm properly trained and that I'm properly prepared in the event, God forbid, that I ever should have to do it. That's my responsibility. My question to you, so what's yours? Anyway, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. Thank you so much for tuning in. We very much appreciate you guys telling all your friends about the Firearms Policy Coalition. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.